Chapter 1. The moment everything changed. My name is Henry, and I've always been the guy who asks too many questions. It was a Tuesday evening in downtown Chicago when I finally understood why I felt so alone in a world full of people. I was sitting in a crowded coffee shop after another frustrating day at my marketing job, watching everyone around me scroll through their phones, laughing at memes, sharing surface-level conversations about weather and weekend plans. I'd just finished reading Schopenhauer's The World's as Will and Representation for the third time, and something inside me felt ... broken, not because the philosophy was depressing, but because it explained exactly why I felt like an alien in my own life. That morning, I'd tried to discuss the ethics of artificial intelligence during our team meeting. I wasn't trying to show off. I was genuinely concerned about how our company's new AI tools might affect people's jobs and privacy. But the moment I started talking about the deeper implications, I watched my colleague's eyes glaze over. My boss actually interrupted me mid-sentence. "Henry, let's keep this practical, okay? We're not running a philosophy class here." Everyone laughed. Not with me, at me. I spent my lunch break alone, as usual, wondering what was wrong with me. Why couldn't I just talk about sports or celebrity gossip like everyone else? Why did every conversation feel shallow when others seemed perfectly content with it? That's when I saw him, an older man with kind eyes and a worn copy of Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil sitting at the table next to mine. He'd been watching me with what looked like recognition, not judgment. "Rough day?" he asked, nodding toward the book in my hands. "You could say that," I replied, surprised that someone had even noticed me. "Arthur Schopenhauer, huh? Heavy reading for a Tuesday evening. I'm Peter Den." He extended his hand with a warm smile. "And you look like someone who's just realized that thinking deeply is both a gift and a curse." Something about his tone made me feel instantly understood. Peter was in his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of presence that suggested he'd spent years thinking about life's big questions. Later, I'd learn he was a renowned philosopher who'd taught at UC Berkeley for over 30 years and written several books about intellectual isolation and social psychology. "How did you know?" I asked. "Because 40 years ago, I was sitting exactly where you are, reading the same book, feeling the same way. The difference is, it took me decades to understand what was happening. Maybe I can save you some time." Chapter 2. The Mirror Effect. Peter invited me to join him, and for the first time in months, I had a conversation that didn't feel like I was speaking a foreign language. "Tell me about your day," he said, settling back in his chair. I explained the meeting, the eye rolls, the feeling that my thoughts were somehow wrong or inappropriate. As I talked, Peter nodded like he'd heard this story 1,000 times before. "Henry, what you experienced today wasn't rejection of your ideas. It was something much deeper and more psychological. Have you ever heard of the mirror effect?" I shook my head. "When you introduced complex ethical questions into that meeting, you weren't just sharing information. You were unconsciously reflecting back to your colleagues their own intellectual limitations. And humans hate having their limitations exposed." Peter explained that unlike other forms of superiority, physical strength, wealth, even talent, intelligence hits people where they're most vulnerable, their sense of self-worth and identity. "Think about it this way," he continued. "If someone is stronger than you physically, you might admire them or feel inspired to work out more. If someone is wealthier, you might feel envious but also motivated to improve your financial situation. But when someone thinks more deeply than you do, it challenges your entire worldview. It suggests that maybe your thoughts, beliefs, and understanding of reality aren't as solid as you believed. This hit me like a lightning bolt. All those blank stares, awkward silences, and topic changes suddenly made sense. I wasn't being rejected for being wrong. I was being rejected for making others feel intellectually inadequate. But why does this happen? I asked. Why can't people just appreciate deeper thinking? Peter smiled knowingly. Because, my friend, the human brain is wired for survival, not truth. And for most of human history, survival meant fitting in with the group, not challenging its beliefs. He explained that our ancestors lived in tribes where being accepted meant safety and being rejected meant death. Even today, our brains still react to intellectual challenges as potential threats to our social standing. This is why, throughout history, society's greatest thinkers have often been its loneliest people. Socrates, Galileo, Nietzsche, Tesla, they all faced the same rejection you're experiencing, not because they were wrong, but because they were right too early. Peter told me about his own journey. As a young professor, he'd struggled with depression and isolation, feeling like his love for deep philosophical discussions made him unemployable in normal social situations. I spent years thinking there was something wrong with me, he said. I tried to dumb down my conversations, pretend I was interested in small talk, force myself to care about things that felt meaningless to me. But that just made me feel like I was betraying my own mind. So what changed? I asked, desperate for hope. I learned to understand the psychology behind the rejection. Once I understood why people react the way they do to deep thinking, I could navigate social situations more wisely. I found my tribe, other people who think deeply, and I learned how to communicate complex ideas in ways that don't trigger people's defense mechanisms. As we talked late into the evening, Peter offered to mentor me through what he called the deep thinker's dilemma. He'd developed a system based on decades of studying philosophy, psychology, and his own experiences navigating intellectual isolation. But I have to warn you, he said as we exchanged contact information. This journey requires you to accept some uncomfortable truths about human nature and society. Are you ready for that? I thought about my day, my loneliness, my frustration with shallow conversations and meaningless work. I'm ready, I said. I can't keep living like this. Chapter 3: The Curse of Consciousness. Over the next few weeks, Peter and I met regularly at various coffee shops around the city. He introduced me to what he called the Deep Thinker's Framework, a systematic approach to understanding and navigating intellectual isolation. Lesson 1: Understanding the Burden. Arthur Schopenhauer believed that intelligence was fundamentally a curse, Peter explained during our second meeting. Not because smart people are destined to be miserable, but because seeing reality clearly often means seeing things others prefer to ignore. He shared a case study from his research. Marcus, a software engineer from Seattle, who'd been fired from 3 jobs not for poor performance, but for asking too many questions about ethical implications of the products his companies were building. Marcus kept pointing out how their apps were designed to be addictive, how their data collection violated user privacy, how their algorithms promoted harmful content. He was absolutely right about everything. But his colleagues and bosses didn't want to hear it. They wanted someone who would just code without questioning the bigger picture. This resonated deeply with me. I thought about all the times I'd been told I was overthinking things or making situations unnecessarily complicated. The curse of consciousness, Peter continued, is that once you start seeing patterns, contradictions, and deeper meanings, you can't unsee them. While others are content with surface explanations, your mind automatically digs deeper. This isn't a choice, it's how your brain works. Peter taught me about Schopenhauer's concept of the will to truth versus the will to comfort. Most people, he explained, are driven by the will to comfort. They seek pleasant experiences and avoid difficult realities. But deep thinkers are driven by the will to truth, even when that truth is uncomfortable. This is why you feel isolated at work, Peter said. Your colleagues are motivated by comfort, doing their jobs, getting paid, avoiding conflict. You're motivated by truth, understanding the real implications of what you're doing, even if it's unsettling. Lesson 2. The neuroscience of rejection. During our third meeting, Peter shared fascinating research from Stanford University about how the brain responds to intellectual challenges. When people feel intellectually inferior, their amygdala, the brain's fear center, becomes highly active, he explained. In simple terms, deep thinking triggers the same response as physical danger. He showed me studies from Australia and Canada demonstrating that people's stress hormones spike when they're exposed to ideas that challenge their existing beliefs. It's not that people consciously choose to reject deep thinkers. Their brains literally perceive intellectual challenges as threats. This explains why your co-workers change the subject when you bring up complex topics, Peter said. They're not being mean or stupid. Their brains are protecting them from what feels like psychological danger. Understanding this helped me feel less personally rejected. It wasn't about me specifically. It was about how human psychology works. Lesson 3. Historical patterns. Peter shared story after story of brilliant minds who faced rejection during their lifetimes. Alan Turing, whose code-breaking work helped end World War II, was persecuted for his personal life and died tragically young. Vincent van Gogh, now considered one of history's greatest artists, sold only one painting during his lifetime and died in poverty. Ignaz Semmelweis, a Hungarian doctor who discovered that hand-washing prevented disease, was ridiculed by the medical establishment and died in an asylum. Notice the pattern, Peter said. Society celebrates these thinkers now, but only after their ideas became safe and widely accepted. During their lifetimes, they were outsiders. This helped me understand that my isolation wasn't a personal failing. It was part of a historical pattern that affects all deep thinkers. Chapter 4. The Practical Application. Armed with this understanding, Peter began teaching me practical strategies for navigating the world as a deep thinker. Strategy 1. Know your audience. Not every conversation needs to be deep, Peter explained. Schopenhauer wrote about the importance of intellectual discretion, knowing when and with whom to share your deeper thoughts. I started practicing this at work. Instead of jumping into complex ethical discussions during team meetings, I began having one-on-one conversations with colleagues who seemed more open to deeper thinking. I discovered that Sarah from accounting actually had fascinating insights about economic inequality, and Mike from IT was passionate about the philosophy of technology. Strategy 2. Find your tribe. Peter connected me with a philosophy discussion group that met monthly at a local bookstore. For the first time in years, I found myself in conversations where my depth was appreciated rather than feared. One of the greatest mistakes deep thinkers make, Peter said, is trying to force shallow people to appreciate depth. Instead, invest your energy in finding people who already value what you have to offer. The philosophy group became my sanctuary. We discussed everything from existentialism to ethics, from consciousness to cosmology. I finally felt like I belonged somewhere. Strategy 3. Master the art of translation. Einstein said that if you can't explain something simply, you don't understand it well enough. Peter taught me. Deep thinkers often fail to communicate their ideas, not because the ideas are wrong, but because they haven't learned to make them accessible. I began practicing this skill, learning to introduce complex concepts gradually, rather than overwhelming people with everything at once. Instead of jumping straight into discussions about AI ethics, I'd start by asking simple questions. Do you ever wonder how these recommendation algorithms decide what to show us? Chapter 5. The Breakthrough. 3 months into my mentorship with Peter, something remarkable happened at work. Our company was implementing a new customer data system, and during the planning meeting, I saw an opportunity to apply what I'd learned. Instead of immediately launching into a lecture about privacy ethics, I asked a simple question. Has anyone thought about how our customers might feel if they knew how much data we're collecting about them? This opened up a productive discussion. Rather than shutting down the conversation, my colleagues began sharing their own concerns. By framing the issue as a customer service question rather than an ethical dilemma, I'd made the topic accessible and non-threatening. The result was that our team developed much stronger privacy protections for the new system. My deeper thinking had actually contributed to a better outcome, but because I'd learned to communicate it wisely. You're beginning to understand, Peter said when I told him about this success. The goal isn't to stop thinking deeply. It's to learn how to share that depth in ways that others can receive. Chapter 6. The Bigger Picture. As my understanding grew, Peter began sharing more advanced concepts about the role of deep thinkers in society. Society needs deep thinkers, he explained, but it doesn't know how to embrace them. This creates a constant tension. Deep thinkers see problems before they become crises, identify solutions before they become obvious, and ask questions that others are afraid to ask. He shared examples from around the world. Rachel Carson, whose book Silent Spring warned about environmental destruction decades before climate change became mainstream concern. John Maynard Keynes, whose economic theories were initially rejected but later saved countries from financial collapse. Marie Curie, whose scientific discoveries were dismissed by male colleagues but revolutionized our understanding of physics. The pattern is always the same, Peter said. Deep thinkers are rejected in the present, but validated by history. The question is, can you find meaning in your thinking, even if the world isn't ready for it yet? Chapter 7. The Personal Transformation. 6 months after that first conversation in the coffee shop, my life had changed dramatically. I wasn't a different person. I was still someone who thought deeply about everything. But I'd learned to navigate the world more skillfully. At work, I'd become known as someone who could see potential problems early and suggest creative solutions. Instead of being seen as the guy who complicated things, I was valued as someone who prevented complications. My social life had improved too. I'd stopped trying to force deep conversations with everyone and instead cultivated meaningful relationships with people who appreciated intellectual depth. The philosophy group had expanded my social circle, and I'd even started dating someone I met there, Emily, a psychology professor who shared my love for examining life's big questions. Most importantly, I'd made peace with my nature. I no longer felt broken or wrong for thinking deeply. I understood that my mind worked differently, and that this difference was valuable even when others couldn't see it. The greatest gift you can give yourself, Peter told me during one of our later conversations, is accepting that you see the world differently, not better or worse than others, differently, and the world needs people who see differently. Chapter 8. The Philosophical Understanding. As my journey progressed, Peter introduced me to more advanced philosophical concepts that helped me understand my place in the world. Schopenhauer wrote about 2 types of people, Peter explained. Those driven by the will to live, focused on pleasure, comfort, and survival, and those driven by the will to knowledge, focused on understanding truth, even when it's uncomfortable. This helped me understand why I'd always felt different. While my colleagues were motivated by paychecks, promotions, and social approval, I was motivated by understanding, meaning, and authenticity. Neither approach is wrong, Peter continued. Society needs both types of people, but deep thinkers often feel isolated because they're a minority. Most people are wired for comfort, while you're wired for truth. Peter also taught me about Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch, not a superior being, but someone who creates their own values rather than blindly following society's expectations. This doesn't mean you should reject all social norms, Peter clarified. It means you should think critically about which norms serve human flourishing, and which ones just maintain the status quo. This gave me a framework for navigating moral and ethical questions without feeling like I had to either completely conform or completely rebel. Chapter 9: Paying It Forward. A year after meeting Peter, I found myself in a position I never expected, mentoring others. It started when a new intern named David joined our company. He reminded me of myself a year earlier, bright, curious, and frustrated by the shallow culture at work. I watched him make the same mistakes I'd made, asking deep questions at inappropriate times and wondering why people seemed annoyed by his insights. During lunch one day, I approached him. "Rough morning?" I asked, noticing his frustrated expression after a team meeting. "I don't understand," David said. I suggested we consider the long-term environmental impact of our new packaging, and everyone looked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. "Don't they care about the future?" I smiled, remembering Peter's words to me. "They do care, but not in the same way you do. Can I share something that might help?" I began teaching David the same lessons Peter had taught me. I introduced him to the philosophy group, helped him understand the psychology behind intellectual rejection, and showed him how to communicate deep ideas in accessible ways. Watching David transform over the following months was incredibly rewarding. He learned to navigate social situations more skillfully while maintaining his intellectual depth. More importantly, he stopped feeling like there was something wrong with him for thinking deeply. "You saved me from years of frustration," David told me one day. I was starting to think I needed to choose between being smart and being accepted. "You don't have to choose," I replied, echoing Peter's wisdom. "You just have to be strategic about how you share your intelligence." Chapter 10: The Ripple Effect. By the second year of my transformation, the effects had spread far beyond my personal life. At work, I'd been promoted to a role where my deep thinking was specifically valued, analyzing long-term trends and potential risks for our company. My ability to see patterns and ask difficult questions had become an asset rather than a liability. The philosophy group had grown from 12 members to over 40, as people discovered the joy of meaningful intellectual discussions. We'd started hosting public lectures and had even influenced some local policy decisions by providing thoughtful analysis of complex issues. Emily and I had moved in together, and our relationship had become a model for how two deep thinkers could support each other, while navigating a world that didn't always appreciate their nature. Most importantly, I'd learned to see my intellectual isolation not as a curse, but as a calling. Deep thinkers, I realized, serve an important function in society. We're the ones who ask uncomfortable questions, challenge outdated assumptions, and see possibilities that others miss. Peter had taught me a crucial lesson. The goal isn't to make everyone think as deeply as you do. The goal is to use your deep thinking to make the world a little bit better, even if most people never understand or appreciate your contribution. Chapter 11: The Modern Challenge. During our final formal meeting, Peter and I discussed how the digital age had both helped and hindered deep thinkers. Social media has created new challenges, Peter explained. Algorithms reward emotional, controversial content over thoughtful, nuanced discussion. Deep thinkers often struggle in this environment because their ideas can't be reduced to viral sound bites. This resonated with my experience. I'd tried sharing philosophical insights on social media, only to be ignored while shallow, inflammatory posts went viral. But the internet has also created new opportunities, Peter continued. For the first time in history, deep thinkers can easily find others who share their interests, regardless of geography. You can access the greatest philosophical texts ever written, participate in global intellectual discussions, and connect with like-minded people around the world. We discussed strategies for thriving as a deep thinker in the digital age. Curate your information, diet carefully, follow accounts that challenge your thinking rather than just confirming your biases. Engage in long-form content, read books, listen to podcasts, and watch lectures, rather than just consuming quick posts. Find online communities that value depth over popularity. Use technology to enhance rather than replace real-world connections. Peter also warned me about the dangers of intellectual isolation in the digital age. It's easy to become so frustrated with shallow online discourse that you withdraw completely from public discussion. But the world needs your voice, even if it doesn't always listen. Chapter 12. The Ultimate Lesson. As our mentorship relationship evolved into a friendship, Peter shared with me the ultimate lesson he'd learned in his decades of studying and experiencing intellectual isolation. The greatest tragedy isn't that society rejects deep thinkers, he said. It's that deep thinkers often reject themselves. They start believing that there's something wrong with them for seeing the world differently. This hit me hard, because I recognized how close I'd come to that self-rejection. Before meeting Peter, I'd been questioning whether I should try to change my nature to become more like everyone else. Henry, your mind is not a bug that needs to be fixed. It's a feature that the world needs. Yes, thinking deeply can be lonely and frustrating. Yes, society often fears and rejects intellectual challenges. But without people like you, humanity would never progress. Peter explained that every major advancement in human civilization had come from people who thought differently, who questioned assumptions, who saw possibilities that others missed. The key is learning to hold two truths simultaneously, he said. First, that your deep thinking is valuable and necessary. Second, that you need to be strategic about how you share it. You can be both authentic and wise, both truthful and tactful. He shared his own story of how this understanding had transformed his life. After years of academic success but social isolation, he'd learned to bridge the gap between intellectual depth and human connection. He'd become someone who could engage with complex philosophical concepts while also connecting with people from all walks of life. The goal isn't to choose between being intelligent and being accepted, Peter said. The goal is to be intelligent in a way that serves both truth and human flourishing. Epilogue: the continuing journey. 3 years have passed since that first conversation in the Chicago coffee shop, and my life is unrecognizable from what it was before. I'm still the same person who asks deep questions and sees complex patterns in simple situations. But I'm no longer lonely or frustrated by my nature. I've built a career that values my analytical thinking, developed relationships with people who appreciate intellectual depth, and learned to navigate social situations without compromising my authenticity. Most importantly, I've found peace with being different. Emily and I got married last year, with Peter officiating the ceremony. His speech focused on how love, like wisdom, requires both depth and accessibility, profound enough to transform us, but expressed in ways that others can understand and appreciate. I now co-lead the philosophy discussion group with Peter, and we've started a mentorship program for young adults who struggle with intellectual isolation. Watching others discover that they're not broken or wrong for thinking deeply has become one of my greatest sources of meaning. The intern David I mentored has become a successful environmental consultant, using his deep thinking about ecological systems to help companies make more sustainable decisions. He often credits our conversations with helping him see his analytical nature as a strength rather than a social handicap. Last month, I gave a TEDx talk titled "The Gift of Thinking Differently," sharing the lessons Peter taught me with a broader audience. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of people reached out to share their own experiences of intellectual isolation and their gratitude for finally feeling understood. But perhaps the most important lesson I've learned is this: the world doesn't fear intelligence itself. It fears change. And deep thinkers represent change. New ideas, challenging questions, alternative perspectives. This fear is natural and understandable, but it's not permanent. Society's relationship with its deep thinkers is slowly evolving. As our world becomes more complex, the value of people who can think systemically, question assumptions, and see long-term consequences becomes more apparent. The key is learning to present deep insights in ways that feel helpful rather than threatening. To anyone reading this who has ever felt alone for thinking too deeply, who has been told they're overthinking or complicating things, who has wondered if there's something wrong with them for seeing the world differently, you are not broken, you are not wrong. You are not alone. Your mind works the way it does for a reason. Society needs people who ask difficult questions, who see patterns others miss, who think beyond the immediate and obvious. The challenge isn't to change your nature, it's to learn how to express your nature in ways that others can receive and appreciate. Find your tribe, learn to communicate wisely, embrace your depth while respecting others' comfort. And remember that throughout history, the people who seemed strangers to their contemporaries were often the ones who moved humanity forward. The burden of consciousness is real, but it's also a gift. The key is learning to carry it gracefully, sharing its insights wisely, and using its power to make the world a little bit better for everyone. As Schopenhauer wrote, all truth passes through 3 stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. Third, it is accepted as being self-evident. Your truth may be in the first or second stage right now, but history suggests that stage 3 is coming. And when it does, the world will be grateful that you never stopped thinking deeply, even when thinking deeply felt like a curse. The journey continues. The questions keep coming, and somewhere out there, another deep thinker is sitting in a coffee shop, reading philosophy, and wondering if they're the only one who sees the world the way they do. They're not alone, and neither are you. The mind that questions everything is the mind that changes everything. Keep questioning, keep thinking, keep being different. The world needs you exactly as you are.